The Waffen-SS is remembered as being the benchmark set by Adolf Hitler for the ideal German soldier. Their ranks were filled with men who fit in with the Nazi impression of a pure Aryan man. But this wasn't always the case. In today's video, we look at the strange recruits of the Waffen-SS during World War II. The SS, or Schutzstaffel, were considered as the elite German soldiers during World War II. Their fighting units would often be the first to receive new or experimental weapons, which often gave them advantage over the enemy. Heinrich Himmler was the Reichsführer of the SS, essentially making him the head of the organisation. As discussed in a previous video, the SS was broken down into different areas of operation and were not solely comprised of fighting units or units which guarded the concentration camps. Prior to the war beginning and in its early years, the standards set for the men hoping to be recruited into the SS were as follows. The recruit must have a standard of physical fitness at least equal to the requirements of the Wehrmacht. The recruit must be of Aryan ancestry. The recruit must have National Socialist beliefs. The recruit must be of the relevant heights for each division. A minimum of 5 feet 10 inches for the Lebensstand, minimum of 5 feet 7 inches for ordinary SS divisions, or those under 21 years old 5 feet 6 inches. A minimum of 5 feet 5 3/4 inches for mountain troops. The recruits were to volunteer into the following 4 categories. Volunteer for the duration of the war. Volunteer for 4.5 years. Volunteer for 12 years. Or volunteer for officer candidate. An age limit for 17 to 45 years old was implemented for all volunteers, with exceptions to the armoured, infantry and signal units, who could be no older than 25 years of age. Restrictions for the 4.5-year volunteer was 17 to 35 years old, and finally restrictions to the 12-year volunteer was 17 to 23 years of age. Active officer candidates were restricted to the same age range. As war progressed and German losses began to pile up on the Eastern Front, the SS was forced to fill more and more gaps left by the Wehrmacht troops. One area would cause previous SS standards to begin to falter. In 1941, German forces had invaded the Kingdom of Yugoslavia and instilled a Croat nationalist leader called Ante Pavelic. Huge amounts of infighting between Bosnian Muslims and Croats was beginning to become a headache for the Germans. Their occupation of the area took away crucial German fighting resources, which could be better placed elsewhere. Heinrich Himmler was fascinated by the Islamic faith. He was of the view that their beliefs helped turn them into the perfect fearless soldiers. This due to the promise of heaven if they were to die in battle. Together with Gottlob Berger, a recruitment officer for the SS, Himmler convinced Hitler to allow the first non-German Waffen-SS division to be formed. The 13th Waffen Mountain Division of the SS Handschar was created in early 1943. Previous standards were scrapped, and a requirement for men between 17 and 45 years, with no criminal record, and to be physically and mentally fit was needed. The initial recruitment process went well, but eventually the number of Muslim fighters fell short of targets set. Due to this, some 3,000 Catholic Croats were drafted into the division. An estimate of final numbers puts it at 23,000 Bosnian Muslims and 3,000 Catholic Croats. Uniforms provided were the standard SS uniforms, with a collar tab for the division, featuring a Handschar or curved sword with a swastika. The notable difference was the headwear. 2 different fez headdresses were worn, one a maroon colour which was worn for parades, and a grey colour which was worn in combat. This obvious difference set out the 13th Division from the rest. The division would be put to use within Yugoslavia and deal with partisan uprisings. They were commanded by mainly German officers and ordered to deal with any anti-German sentiment. From their inception until the end of the war, the division would mainly fight in the Yugoslav area. This was because they were fighting in familiar territory and spoke the language of the locals. For the most part, they were successful in their endeavours against the partisans. However, as the war progressed and they began to suffer more losses to men and supplies, they were forced back towards Austria. Their fighting against Soviet troops was particularly brutal, and they suffered heavy losses. Many of the men would desert the division right up until the last days of fighting. Post-war, several war crimes committed by the division were uncovered. About 40 members were to stand trial, with around 10 being executed following guilty verdicts. Many of the men would continue fighting long after World War II in the civil wars in the Yugoslav region and the Middle East. The division paved the way for non-German recruits into the Waffen-SS. Their ability showed Himmler, and indeed Hitler too, that non-Aryan fighters could indeed be useful to what the Nazi High Command were attempting to achieve. Ultimately though, like all the other SS and German fighting forces, they were unable to keep the Allied powers at bay. What did you think about the 13th Waffen-SS Mountain Division? Did you realise there were non-Aryan SS units during the war? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below. As always guys, thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you want to expand your knowledge and join the growing Premier History community.